Welcome into the edition of Three True Values. That's right, it is college basketball season. We have played some games. We will talk about those games here in the first segment. We're going to break down the good, the bad, and the ugly from night one across the sport. So, what did we see? What does it mean? We'll get into all of those things. We'll talk about the top teams that played, the best players that we saw. Then, in the second segment, we will come back. We're going to talk about some of my preseason projections. We've got All-Americans to talk about. We've got Final Four picks. And these are put out before the start of yesterday's games. I put them out on social media, but we're going to run through them, explain why I think each of these players and each of these teams has what it takes, despite one of them taking a real early hit to their resume last night. Then, third segment will come back. That's right, it's back. We are going to do the Game of the Week segment. We'll go through each day. We'll start with tonight. We'll go through next Monday, and we will give you the top college basketball game to put on your television and get yourself ready. Throughout the course of the season, we'll watch different teams. We'll go league to league. We'll talk about teams that are on the bubble. We'll talk about teams that could be upset picks later on in the season. We'll talk about the top teams, of course. We'll try to get you a comprehensive list so that you know all the best teams by the time we get to March and you're starting to fill out that bracket. You've seen everybody play at least once or twice. But as we get into the show, I think we have to lead off. I said good, bad, and ugly, but I think we're going to go with the bad and the ugly first and talk about this Michigan State team, the loss that they took to James Madison. Overtime, but really, you can't make that any sort of excuse. It's not like this game got drawn out. It's not like they were in control down the stretch and some weird things happened. No, James Madison beat them straight up to start the season. And it was by no lack of effort by Tyson Walker, who attempted to basically outscore the other team by himself, scored more than 30 points in that matchup. Cohen Carr, a freshman who I've been very public, I love Cohen Carr's game. I think he's going to be a big impact player for them down the stretch. If they can reach the potential of what this team can be, he can have a major role on a deep run NCAA tournament type of team. But they've got some things to work out clearly. First among them, the three-point shooting. A team that shot more than 20 threes and made one in regulation. If you shoot 5% from the three-point line in the modern college basketball, modern basketball game in general, I don't care what level you're playing at. If you shoot 1 for 20 from three to start off a game, you're not going to win very often. And so that'll be interesting to see from Michigan State, not just next game, not just next week, not just through the non-conference schedule. From now until March, what does their three-point shooting look like? Because if this was a fluke and it was just the worst shooting night of the season for 6-7 different guys on the roster and they all had bad nights at once, they all shot 0%, nobody could get anything to fall, that's one thing. You can dismiss that. You can say, look, they had one terrible game. If they bounce back, they win the next one by 30. You can move on. You can put this to the side, and we don't have to talk about it anymore. But right now, it's the only sample size we have, so we have to discuss it. We have to talk about what is this Michigan State team? Because I think everyone believed with the returning production that they had, with the distribution of talent from different positions, they have veteran guards who have worked well together over the past few years. They've got guys on the wing who are proven scorers. You've got athletic incoming freshmen to play at forward. You've got a center coming in as a freshman who is a 5-star who seems to fit the mold of centers who have come before him at Michigan State. You've also got depth at the center position, at those forward positions, from more veteran players who return to Michigan State. And so you look at this team and everything seems to already be in place. So can we look back at last season's shooting and say this is just an obscure data point, not going to happen again. I think in general, yes. But I will point to one interesting case that I found in the transfer portal over the offseason that really had me scratching my head and made me think about this on a couple different levels. Because you have a down game, right? You shoot 0% from three, you've attempted 5. Regression to the mean says you're going to make more the next few games. You're going to get back to whatever it is your percentage is, whatever your correct shooting percentage might be. But sometimes these variables come over long sample sizes as well. We're only playing 30-something games. This isn't like the NBA where they play 82. 82 is the equivalent of almost 3 seasons in college basketball. And so the amount of fluctuation we can see through the professional ranks, you don't have as much time at the college level to balance out those numbers. I look at a guy now at Florida, started his college career at San Francisco, Julian Rishwain. Shot 2 seasons ago about 50% from the three-point line, and not on a small sample size. We're talking right at or above 1 attempt per game. So we're talking about a decent sample size. He played throughout the season, not a guy who just came in at the end of games, nothing like that. But last season, shot in the 20s from the three-point line. And no, there was no drastic decrease or increase in the three-point field goal attempts for him last season. And so, yes, we can probably dismiss this Michigan State's performance as, well, they shot the worst they're going to shoot all year. It can't, well, it can. They can shoot 0 for 20, but it can't get much worse than it was last night. The problem is, how long is it going to take them to get it together? Now, this is also across multiple players. You're talking about within an offensive system. You're talking about all kinds of different reasons why that won't be the case, why it won't go from 50% to 20%, whatever the case is. But it'll be interesting to watch. Are they a significantly worse three-point shooting team than we expected them? Because that will hurt them. That will make it a lot harder for them to win once we get into March, once we get into the conference portion of the schedule. A couple of teams that I don't know if impressed is the right word, because they're top teams in the country. They were supposed to do this to the teams that they were playing. But I thought Purdue kind of put some of the narratives to bed. I think a lot of people, me included, is just hesitant on Purdue. You've seen them get knocked out a couple times, and it's hard to just put them at number 1. Just assume that they're going to be different this year. But I thought that they showed some good things against the Samford team that, no, talent-wise, they do not match up. But they play that kind of small ball sort of style that has given Purdue trouble the past couple of years. So I thought it was a good sign for them to go out and get a dominant win, Zach Edey to control the game, everything that went into that. Kansas, of course, rolled in their game. Duke looked good. Kyle Filipowski is going to be, I mean, we'll talk about him in the next segment. I don't think there's any surprise there, but he is going to be incredible this season. I don't think there's any doubt about that. As we look at the other games, though, throughout yesterday's slate, I think that there's plenty to just take in, to look at. I thought that one thing, and this was one of the first games that I flipped on, of course, the first meaningful game that I flipped on, Georgia and Oregon in the afternoon. But among the ranked teams, one of the first games that I flipped on was Tennessee. Now, they were playing Tennessee Tech. They were likely going to blow them out regardless. But we talked to David Cobb about, and we've talked on this show about, the combination of three-point shooting and defense. They've added three-point shooters to the roster. Can those three-point shooters play enough defense for Rick Barnes to keep them on the floor? Can those other guys who are so good defensively, can the way this floor is spaced help them to score more points? Can they get this offense going and complement the defense? The answer to that, at least in the first half, I know they took their foot off the gas a little bit in the second half. I didn't watch as much of the second half, but it looked really good. And they end up shooting 40% from the 3-point line. That'll get it done. Making double-digit three-pointers in this game, that'll play for Tennessee. I think that this is everything so far through one game. This is everything that Rick Barnes could have hoped for from Dalton Knecht and Jordan Gainey. They've spaced the floor out a little bit. Knecht has shown some additional elements of his game that have impressed through the preseason and into the start of this year that I think kind of elevate this team even further, one step further. And I know that, again, it's like Purdue. People are kind of hesitant because Tennessee hasn't had that deep NCAA tournament run under Rick Barnes. But when the roster says one thing, sometimes you have to kind of tune out the past when the roster says something different than what the past has said in those previous experiences. Going through, I think that we talk about Alabama quite a bit on this podcast, and I do just want to – Grant Nelson. I will talk more about him in the next segment as well, but Grant Nelson, he came out and looked the part of that unicorn that we heard about at North Dakota State the last couple seasons. He showed why. There are NBA scouts who think that he can do this at the next level. As we kept going through the night, North Carolina played a game a little closer than you would have liked against Radford. They pulled away in the second half, and I'm not going to try to raise any big alarm bells. I'm not going to tell you that I don't need to double down. I've said what I need to say about North Carolina. We will wait and see. We'll talk about it whenever we need to talk about it. But USC handling Kansas State in the biggest game of the night, the most important game of the night, I would say. Kansas State not in the top 25 to start the year, but they're in that conversation. They bring in Tyler Perry. They bring in Arthur Kaluma. Naquan Tomlin, of course, away from the team right now with the suspension. But I think that this Kansas State team is an NCAA caliber team. They can make the tournament. And USC took care of business. I thought Boogie Ellis, he had a big night. He got some help from various players, Kobe Johnson included, on that roster. I'm interested to see, we did get an update yesterday that Bronny James will have an appointment with doctors the end of this month. Depending on how that goes, he could then start the ramp-up process, practice with the team, and get ready to contribute to USC's season. So I think if all goes to plan, if all goes well, if things work out for him with this appointment at the end of the month, I think you could expect to see him in some of those later non-conference games as we get into December and get into the latter portion as we ramp up for the conference slate. I think that's probably the most likely window if things go to plan where you could see Bronny James playing college basketball. As we kept rolling through the night, though, I mean, really not a lot of other takeaways. It was a light night in college basketball, and it's something I want to touch on before we move to the next segment is the idea of college basketball having all these games. It's great, wall-to-wall games. You know, just about everyone played last night. The ones who didn't, they'll play tonight. They'll play on Wednesday. So we'll get to see everybody if we want to over the course of just a couple days. But the problem I see is you look at the way that the NFL kicks off their season. The way they start their season is two marquee standalone teams on a Thursday night. And they treat it like Sunday Night Football, their biggest product. Okay, so it's the biggest game they can put together, and they present it to you as a massive deal. You look at how the NBA starts their season. They pick two games. You know, the Lakers are probably going to be in there. The reigning champs are going to get their rings. And then you'll get two big markets or superstars facing off on that opening night. You've got the two windows, early and late. You look at how Even the MLB. You don't see many MLB openers where a team is just playing inner squad against, like the Cardinals and the Athletics. You don't see those. You see Cardinals Cubs, Cardinals Reds, Cardinals Brewers. Generally speaking, you open the season with big games. You want to draw excitement. And I know that you're competing with the college football schedule. I know it's not easy. But Monday night, if you're going to dominate college athletics, opening your season on a Monday or Tuesday night, you have the window. You have the opportunity to steal eyes away from. There's no college football going on. And so why are we playing the first games of the season, IUPUI, at 10 a.m.? Why is that the first game? Not even available. You can't even watch it. The first meaningful game is a true TV game between Georgia and Oregon being played in Las Vegas in an empty arena. What does that do for your product? Who is that helping? I just don't understand why we can't start with a Champions Classic type of setup where we get Kentucky, we get Michigan State, we get USC, Kansas, whatever it is, whatever the big draws are. Give me 2-3 games on opening night, build up the hype for it, make it a big event, and then the next night, everyone else can play. Everyone else can play. We'll do this thing where we go from 10 a.m. all the way through midnight. That's fine. We can play that way. I'm all for the full span of 12 plus hours of basketball. They used to do the 24 hours of basketball to start the season, whatever. But there was a draw regardless. There was the Champions Classic. There was the 24 hours of basketball. They had some kind of draw. There was no added attention. You know how many people I had talk to me yesterday who I said, oh, college basketball's happening. I'm watching college basketball all day. And they were like, oh, that starts today? The season starts? It started? Like nobody was aware that the season was even here. So there's got to be marketing strategies that they can use to build up hype and get people more interested in the start of the college basketball season. That's the end of my rant. That's an issue, obviously, for another day because the season is already here. We are already into it, and we are playing basketball games. So when we come back on the other side, we will talk about my preseason picks for All-Americans, my Final Four picks, and much more here on 3 True Values. Welcome back into 3 True Values. James Fletcher here, talking to you about All-American picks and Final Four picks. We'll start with the All-Americans. I'm sure most people start Final Four and then go All-Americans, but because I have the benefit of knowing that one of my Final Four picks did not do so great yesterday, we're going to focus on the All-American picks, who did great yesterday. I am going with, and to lead things off, I will start with Player of the Year prediction, Hunter Dickinson. I think that transferring to Kansas, he's got all eyes on him. He really built up his brand through that transfer portal process. He goes to the number 1 team in the country. He goes to a team that has a great chance to win a national title. And right or wrong, the perception of him going would likely become that he took them over the top, that he helped them get over that hump to get there. Now, I'm not saying Kansas as a program get over the hump. Obviously, Bill Self has done this time and time again. He's taken plenty of teams there as recently as a couple years ago. But this group in particular, this group of players, I think that the perception will be that's a really good group of players. And Hunter Dickinson, who led the way for them. So if he's able to do that, I think he's a lock. If he can get them a 1 seed, I think it's going to come down to him and my second pick, Zach Edey. Zach Edey, who reigning Player of the Year. We've seen how hard it is to repeat, though. Oscar Tshiebwe came back last year, did not even enter the discussion for Player of the Year because it's hard to repeat that kind of success. Zach Edey has the tools to do it, though. They're going to run different things at him. They're going to guard him in different ways. They're going to use everything they learned from the games that Purdue lost last season to try to slow him down, to try to build up the best defense possible to guard him. Will it matter? We'll see, because he is a large human being who is really good at basketball. I think it was a lot easier to slow down Oscar Tshiebwe. No offense to him, nothing wrong with his game. It's just at 6'8", it's a lot easier to come up with different schemes than it is for a guy who's 7'4". Third on my list, and a guy who I think has potential to get up into that conversation for Player of the Year, depending on how his team performs, Kyle Filipowski at Duke. He returns for his sophomore season. I think I had him as a borderline lottery pick in last year's draft, probably slipping into the 20s, probably. But he could have risen depending on the pre-draft process, all kinds of things. He ends up coming back, and I think that was huge for Jon Scheyer, huge for Duke, huge for Filipowski, because now we're talking about a guy who really got things figured out last year. He looked like he knew what he was doing on a college basketball floor. He put things together. He looked really good, and now he's surrounded by more five-star freshmen, as well as Tyrese Proctor, as well as Jeremy Roach returning. I think he's got everything he needs to have a just phenomenal season and be at the top of college basketball this year. Now, I'm going to go, you guys know, and I get it. I don't like the setup of picking, three centers. Filipowski, you could say, is a forward. You could call him a forward. I don't like the idea of just picking a bunch of big men, because that's college basketball, and we'll just have 5 big men on our team, and that'll be fine. Who cares? It's just 5 guys being named All-Americans. I don't like the idea of it. I like the idea of 2 guards, 2 forwards, a center, or 2 centers and a forward and 2 guards. I don't care, but I'm trying to predict what they're going to do. Okay, so this is not necessarily how I would do it if I was ranking them, because I would like to have multiple guards in there, because I think that we lose sight of how impactful guards are in college basketball, because the centers put up these big stat lines because of the way the game is played. That being said, the guard that I am going to put in here, I'm going to go with 1 guard. It's going to be Tyler Kolek at Marquette. He's a guy, comes back, veteran. Last year, throughout the season, I thought he got better and better. That Marquette team got better and better. He ended up winning the Big East title over UConn, who, of course, went on to win the national title. So Tyler Kolek, he's done it against elite competition. I think he's a year older in that system. They bring back a large portion of that roster. We talked about them, though. I want to see how they replace Omax Prosper before I start going around calling them a Final Four contender. But I think that he is the leader of that team. You've also got, of course, Cam Jones, who in that backcourt as well, he could be right up in there in that same conversation. But Kolek, I think, as the point guard, gets a little bit of a nod over him just because of the usage rate, how much he has the ball in his hand from possession to possession. And finally, I'll round out my All-American picks with Grant Nelson at Alabama. I went back and forth on who to put in this spot. I did debate putting a second guard in this spot, trying to figure out a guard across the country who could have that type of All-American season. But when I came down to it, the things that I've heard about Grant Nelson, how he's translated from North Dakota State to Alabama, the way that they plan to use him, he could play 5, 4, and 3 for Alabama this season. They really think that he can play all the way across those positions, the way he can handle the ball, the way he can catch it on the perimeter. We saw him put up a poster last night in his debut for Alabama, going from the perimeter, driving up over a defender and dunking it. He's got everything in his bag that you need to succeed in college basketball. I think that he's a guy who's going to draw some NBA interest as well, the way that he's playing. If he can keep that going, if he can do that against SEC level competition, I don't think there's any reason to believe that he won't slowly move into the first round conversation of the NBA draft. I know last year, close to entering, he went through the process and decided to withdraw. I think there was feedback probably that there were some things he needed to work on. And in addition to those things that he needed to work on, they just wanted to see it against a higher level of competition. He didn't play a lot of big schools last year. So, yeah, you can bet on a mid-major kid having success, but we'd much rather Just watch him do it against the other NBA caliber players and then know what we're getting when we draft you, especially because he was in that second round conversation at the time. So there it is. Hunter Dickinson, Zach Edey, Kyle Filipowski, Tyler Kolek, and Grant Nelson. Now, you ask, they all played last night. How did they do? Dickinson put up 21 points, 8 rebounds, 5 assists on 8 of 9 shooting, 3 of 3 from 3. Zach Edey, 16 points, 11 rebounds, 4 blocks on 5 of 6 shooting. So we're through 2 players. We've only got 2 missed baskets from last night. Pretty good. We got Kyle Filipowski, 25 points, 7 rebounds on 10 of 12 shooting and 1 of 2 from 3. So we're talking about 3 players who missed a combined 4 shots and average over 20 points between them. You had Grant Nelson into the mix, who had 24 points, 7 rebounds on 7 of 12 shooting. Yeah, he wasn't quite as efficient, but I'll take over 50% shooting and 2 for 4 from 3. I'll take it. I'm all right with that. And then Tyler Kolek at 14 points, 5 rebounds, 4 assists, 5 of 8 shooting, 3 of 4 from 3. They all proved me to be, if not right, at least I was on the right track. Like, these guys are among the best basketball players in the college ranks. I don't think there's any doubt about that at this point. Now, let's talk about my final 4 picks. Coming in at number 1 in the final 4 picks, my pick to win the NCAA tournament this season. And I know it's going to be hard if it doesn't happen, because I keep doing it. I keep betting on him, and he keeps getting right there to the doorstep. This is the breakthrough. Eric Musselman is taking Arkansas to a national championship. I'm calling it now. That team is deep. That team is good. They can play a million different ways. They've got athletic, smaller centers. They've got big centers who will be physically dominant down low. They've got scoring guards. They've got defensive guards. They've got guys on the wing. They've got everything that you could ever want to plug in together. They can plug it and play it in any combination they want. This Arkansas team is legit, and I am rolling with them to win the national title. Now, coming in at second, a team that I think is right in the it's so hard to pick. The team that I think that they'll play against, the runner-up, Duke. We talked about Filipowski. We talked about Proctor. We talked about Roach. You bring in all those veterans, Mark Mitchell as well, and you pair them with Sean Stewart, with McCain. I mean, this is a really good team. They're going to combine those 5-star freshmen with those veteran players who come back for another season, and they're going to look really good all season long, probably a 1 seed by the time it's all said and done. Third team on the list, I'm going Tennessee. And I think they kind of reinforced, they made me feel good last night about this pick. I made the pick, and I was like, this is an upside pick here. This is an upside pick. You got to have one upside team in your Final Four, because you know it's not just going to be 4 1 seeds. You're not going to get 1 seed Duke, 1 seed Arkansas, 1 seed Kansas. That's just not going to happen. It's just not feasible. It never happens in college basketball. So who's that team that's going to go from a 4 or 5 seed, go on a run because their team either gets hot or they play in a certain way that presents matchup problems? Well, how about a team that plays outstanding defense and can now shoot threes at a high clip? Seems like a good candidate to me. So I'm going with Tennessee there. And finally, Michigan State in that 4th slot. They did not help me out last night. They lose to James Madison, but I hope that was just an incredible outlier of a performance, especially from the shooting perspective, that they will be able to shoot. Because if they shoot, 30% from 3, not even a good percentage. They shoot 25%. Like, that's bad. We'd say, man, they struggled shooting the ball last night, but they would have won pretty handily. It would have been close to a double-digit game at the end of regulation. So I think I'm still going to roll with them. I'm not going to back off of them. It's 1 day into the season. So I'm going with Michigan State. All that they have returning, I think they can be a Final Four team as well. Now, those other teams that are just on the outside that can easily sneak in, say Michigan State ends up not being in that conversation. Tennessee doesn't live up to it. Whatever, Duke has injuries. Arkansas makes it to the Elite Eight as they do every year, but can't break into the Final Four. Other teams to keep on your radar, Alabama, Memphis. I know those seem like homer picks because I'm from Memphis. I went to Alabama. But you look at this combination of talent, and I think those are both upward trajectory teams. Those are teams that if they figure it out, they put everything together. You've also got Villanova. I think they're in that conversation that can kind of like sneak in. Purdue, if they can put the pieces together, if they can kind of learn from the last few years, learn from what has happened to them, there's no reason to think Purdue cannot be in the Final Four. I think Texas has a chance. Miami, I don't want to rule Miami out. Miami, like, seems like every year Larrañaga takes this team way deeper than they have any business going into the NCAA tournament. You've also got UConn in that conversation as well. And I think the big sleeper, and this is one I'm not going to try to take credit for it because I knew they were good. I knew they had returning veteran talent. I knew that they had brought in some transfers. But I'm not going to try to take credit for this because I've seen a couple of people pick New Mexico in their Final Four. Now, if you're looking for a real sleeper, somebody that you can probably get some great money on in Vegas, that would be the team to bet on. New Mexico, they have got a really good roster under Richard Pitino. I think that they easily could be that sleeper team that makes a deep run into the NCAA tournament. When we come back on the other side, though, we will bring back the Game of the Week segment. We will run through every day. What's the one game you need to put on your TV, put on your phone while you're out wherever you are? If it's on the bar, if it's not on the bar, ask the bartender, can you put that game on? Whatever it is, wherever you are, check into these games each night of the week so that you're ready for all of college basketball all season long. We'll do that on the other side. Welcome back into the final segment of this week's edition of Three True Values. Do want to take a second at the start of this final segment just to reflect on and acknowledge the passing of legendary college basketball coach Bob Knight, who passed away this past week. Thoughts and prayers, of course, with his family, with everyone who knew him across not just college basketball, but life as well. I've seen plenty of reflections on his life, whether it's people talking about their experiences with him, college basketball writers, former players, former coaches who worked under him or against him. You see a lot of the word complicated. And I know that he had issues throughout his career, but at the end of the day, he was kind of the image for a great college basketball coach for decades across the sport. And things turned sour at Indiana, of course, but he was able to return to that court before his death. He was able to get that applause from the fans, that recognition for everything that he accomplished across the entire sport. And I think that it's just great to hear all these people talk about the human side of Bob Knight, everything that went into who he was, all the things that he did, and really kind of reflect on him more for that than as a basketball coach. Of course, growing up, I did not live through much of his coaching tenure, but I remember Bob Knight always being introduced to me as the guy who threw the chair. That's what I always remember him for. As a little kid, that was the coach who threw the chair. And now, being a college basketball fan, being somebody who follows this sport so closely, who talks to people within the game, I've learned that he was much more than that. And over the past week, I've learned even more of who he was to these certain people who have been able to speak about their experiences with him. So I just want to say rest in peace to Bob Knight. And again, thoughts and prayers with his family, with everyone who's impacted by his death. What a life and what a career he had. As we move on to this final little segment here, we are going to give you the games of the week. One of them, go ahead and give you a hint. It's got a little bit of a Bob Knight flair to it. But we're going to talk about the games that you need to watch. I know I introed it in the last segment. I know it's a podcast, so it's not like you're just showing up. But every week we're going to do this. Every week I'm going to give you in the final segment the games that you need to watch. The games that are going to be influential for the storyline of college basketball. Every night there's something on TV that you can watch and you can take away from, and you can put it in your bank, in your head, and now you know more about the sport. You know more about this season. You know more about these narratives that are going to matter once we get to March and you start to fill out your bracket. I know a lot of people, that's what they care about. They care about that bracket, so you're going to know a lot more about these teams so that when you see them on the bracket, you know, okay, they struggle with this. I watched them. They can't play against a big man like that. You know, hey, I watched them. They look great. I like their coach. I like the way that they progress through the year. We'll go with them. So we'll get a lot of that throughout the season. So as we open things up, we're going to open with tonight's games, Tuesday slate. I'm going with, and there's really one option here, is Baylor against Auburn on ESPN. Got top 25 team going up against a team that's borderline top 25. Certainly picked to be in the NCAA tournament at this point. And I think it'll be a really good test for both teams to open the season. If we move to Wednesday, we've got Mississippi State and Arizona State, two teams that will be starting their season. They haven't played any games yet. These are both bubble teams. Mississippi State playing without Tolu Smith. We'll see how that goes. But I think it'll be a good matchup, a key indicator, an early bubble matchup, if you will, for those two teams. St. Mary's and New Mexico on Thursday, that game on ESPN+. Let me back up, that Wednesday game not scheduled for a TV slot. I assume if nowhere else, it will be on SEC Network Plus or ESPN Plus, one of those two. I would assume that, but you'll have to check back and find out where that game is. St. Mary's and New Mexico on ESPN Plus. That's a Thursday game. St. Mary's, the top 25 team. New Mexico, a team that we just talked about. Plenty of people across college basketball, some smart people in college basketball, are picking them as their sleeper Final Four team. So you'll want to tune in for that one for sure. Friday night, we get to our first marquee blockbuster game of the college basketball season. We've got Duke and we've got Arizona. Huge game. Top 10 teams. Two teams that I think have outstanding rosters. They bring back a combination of young guys and veterans. They bring in a couple of transfers. I think this is a huge game in college basketball. Early on, we're going to get a good glimpse at both of these teams. That game on ESPN2 on Friday night. On Saturday, yes, I know, we're going head-to-head with college football. So what are we going to do? We're going to go with two teams. One team especially, who you're going to think more about them in college basketball than college football. That's Creighton against North Dakota State. Now, North Dakota State, they've got a fantastic football team, but they play in the FCS, not FBS. So, you know, I know the way Division I is separated is different in football, basketball, but this basketball team technically plays within the structure of 1, 2, 3. They play at a higher level. So Creighton and North Dakota State on FS2 in the morning. You'll want to tune into that one. Check out that Creighton team, what they've got. And North Dakota State, I know they lost Grant Nelson, but they're still going to be a contender in the Summit League. So we move to Sunday, where Indiana and Army is the pick on Big Ten Network. Our first glimpse at Indiana. We get to see them play against Army. I'm sure they will be honoring Coach Knight throughout that game. And so you'll want to tune in for that one, see what they've got there. And on Monday, just before we come back and talk again next Tuesday, you'll want to watch St. John's against Michigan on FS1. St. John's, Rick Pitino's team, going up against Juwan Howard and Michigan. That Michigan team that a little bit pieced together. We'll see what they look like. We'll get a glimpse at how they were able to put together a roster despite some struggles, thinking they were going to add some guys, not being able to add on, all that went on. Let's see what they look like now against the St. John's team, which has a ton of new pieces. Rick Pitino putting that roster together from scratch. That's it here on Three True Values this week. I'm your host, James Fletcher. Thank you for tuning in. If you haven't gotten to go through the previews, the preseason slate that we did, we talked to some excellent guests. They have some really nice insight. So I encourage you, go back, watch those, listen to them wherever you get your podcasts. We are on YouTube. We are on Spotify. We are on Apple Podcasts. I believe we are on every other podcast network. Those are the three that I know how to use or have used. So if you get your podcast somewhere else, just go look for it because I bet it's there. If it's not, hit me up. I'll make sure we get it posted there. Again, this is James Fletcher, 3 True Values. The season is underway. College basketball is here. Thanks for watching.